welcome back to In Conversation with Starcraft's Blogstars for Crochet Now. Today we are joined by Jane from Janie Crow and Helen from Crystals and Crochet. Hi ladies.
Hello.
We've got a nice thorny topic for you today, one which is pretty controversial with some people, and that's tension. I know there are some people out there who absolutely refuse to do tension squares and just merrily go into a project without realizing how important actually checking your tension before you start is. So that's what I'd like us to talk about today. So first of all, why is tension important? Jane?
Oh, tension. It's one of those things. I think a lot of crocheters just put their fingers in their ears, don't they, when you mention tension? La, 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 la. I always think it's great because it's, you know, crocheters are so desperate to get on and get into their projects that they don't necessarily check their tension. And I think knitters are far more likely to be aware of tension, probably because they make garments, whereas a lot of crocheters, when they're working on blankets or cushions or whatever, they're just not so focused on their tension. But I mean, the two standard reasons you check your tension is, one, it comes out the right size, and two, you use the right amount of yarn.
Oh,
absolutely.
So if you've bought a kit, and in the kit you've got a pattern that tells you to work to the right tension, then obviously that kit has been worked out according to the tension that the designer or the pattern producer is telling you to work to.
So can I ask, if your tension is too loose, does that mean then you're using up more yarn?
More yarn,
yes.
and for crochet,
and your project's going to be bigger.
Yeah, and for crochets you could use a huge amount more yarn if you've not got. I mean, if you think about the steps in a stitch, if you've got a different tension to me as the designer on every step of every stitch, you could be using a lot more yarn, or a lot less if you're a tight crocheter.
Right. And Helen, why do you think tension is important?
Exactly what Jane has said, but also the look of the finished fabric that you're making.
Oh, that's interesting.
Particularly my type of designs where there's a lot of textured stitches. If you work very, very tightly, you sort of lose it. Yeah. And if you work too loosely, again, everything looks a bit sloppy and you know,
slack.
Great.
Right.
So it's about quality and quantity.
Mm-hmm. So when you're faced with a crochet pattern, would it say do a tension square in the dominant stitch? So if it was lots of trebles, would you do tension in trebles, or would you do tension in double crochet? What would a pattern normally say?
Nothing about tension at all.
That's what I was just about to say. I put it in mine, and you know, like how knitters, you put a standard tension in, don't you? So say you're knitting something in moss stitch, the tension might be said, it might say achieve this tension over pattern, meaning moss stitch, or it might give you a stocking stitch tension, assuming that if you get the stocking stitch right, you get the moss stitch right. But on crochet patterns, there's very rarely a tension, and what I do on my patterns is I give a measurement at certain stages of the design. So if you're working through a motif, I've got a little one here, I would have said how big it should be at that point, how big it should be at that point, how big when it's finished. And like I know Helen on her blankets, you know, she'll give measurements for each stage of her if she's working in the round. But there's not many patterns that would just give a tension over like a square of
Why
stitch.
not? Why wouldn't you do that?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Because by the time you've crocheted half a motif, that's quite a lot of your time. Whereas a square,
if it's a garment, if you look at a crochet pattern for a garment, then yes, tension is mentioned, because obviously sizing for garments is very tension sensitive.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to end up with, you know, like the old jumper granny used to knit you that was like 10 sizes too big or 10 sizes too small. But as Jane said, particularly when it comes to items for home decor, so whether it's cushions, blankets, whatever, people had so many problems when I first started designing, and particularly with doing yarn packs and things like that, of, oh, there's not enough yarn in this yarn pack. Well, actually, I had loads left over. So
Yeah.
that's why I did a huge get my words out, tutorial on my website all about tension and gauge. And basically what I do when I'm sort of saying anything to check tension, I refer people back to this tutorial, which is simply 2 rounds, so making a tiny little square, 2 rounds of US double, UK treble, and the size it should measure from side to side. Because it's very, very easy for people to simply knock up a little square and check, do I need to go up in hook size or down in hook size in order to get the right measurement?
Yeah, and I think that makes it easy.
Technically, what we're talking about here is gauge, not tension.
Right. Would you like to explain the difference to us?
Okay, so gauge is the size of the stitches that make a certain size, yeah? Tension is the actual tension that you put on the yarn as you're working. So the two absolutely work together.
Right.
But tension is not just about how you actually form the stitch, it's also about how you actually hold the yarn.
Ah, okay.
Because an awful lot of people complain when they hold their yarn, they get like this groove in their finger. Well, to be honest, if that's happening and you're holding the yarn that tightly, you're actually killing yarn.
Yeah.
You're pulling it so tight that your stitches are going to be really flat instead of being nice and plump. And it doesn't matter what fibre you're using.
So what
Again,
else? So you're saying holding the yarn too tight can affect tension. Jane, what else can affect tension?
Well, all sorts of things. I think it depends. We were just talking about off air, weren't we, about hooks, what hook you use, what the yarn content is. If it's got cotton in it, obviously cotton hasn't got the same sort of like elasticity that wool or acrylic has got. If you've been drinking your wine, that'll make a difference. You'll be a bit more relaxed. If you're feeling a bit stressed, if you've had a bad day, then that could make you a bit tighter. I think it's, and actually what I was going to say as well is, you know, it's the assumption that every designer works to the same tension, because all designers will work to a different tension. So, you know, it's that as well. But also, what was I going to say? I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Do you think tension varies a lot more between people than it does in knitting, in crochet?
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. I found definitely that my tension has changed over my crochet career. Right. So like when I was younger and had more, my poor arthritic fingers, I was a tighter hooker than I am now. So it's, you know, just because you got the right tension when you were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, doesn't mean that your tension will always stay the same. And I think because there's not a standard tension gauge with crochet so much like there is with knitting. With knitting, it's on the ball band, isn't it?
Yeah, 22 by 30 for DK.
Yeah, and it's just not for crochet. And I think that's just because crochet hasn't existed in the way that it's not as popular as it is now. Yes. So it's always been geared to knitters and not crocheters. I think it's changing.
So yeah.
I think the Starcraft did, and there maybe, and I think perhaps they put it on special.
But does that actually help if everyone's working with different hooks or?
Well, no, not really, because it will be the designer that will, you know, come up with a different tension.
Right.
I don't know the answer. I think more crochet patterns need to have, like Helen said, a measurement in them.
give you a hint of what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And do different stitches affect the tension? So
Yes.
Okay, so how does that work, Helen?
Well, basically, what you'll often find is if you've got, for instance, a pattern that has got a lot of US single, UK double, people will tend to go slightly tighter on their tension. Yeah.
Right.
But as the stitch gets taller, once you get into the sort of treble, double treble, or in UK terms, double treble, quadruple treble, triple treble, because you've got that many more yarn over and pull through twos, people tend to lift their hook up more.
Oh.
So a lot of tension also comes down to what's known as the golden loop.
Golden loop.
So okay, let me see if I can explain this. When you've got stitches like this, yeah, and you put your hook into the top 2 loops of the stitch like that, and then you pull up. If you are working what I call classic tension, your hook will sit on top.
Can you move that over? We just got up,
Sorry, your hook will sit on top of your stitches.
Yes.
If you tend to yank down, you're going to shorten the stitch.
Oh.
Lift up, you're going to lengthen the stitch.
Right.
So again, that's going to make a massive difference to your gauge.
Right.
So that's your finished size. But also, as Jane said before, every single movement of every single stitch, if you've got a blanket that's got 50,000 stitches in it, and each stitch, each movement, you use 1 millimeter more yarn, you've ended up using hundreds of meters more yarn than somebody else would have done.
So that's why some people, their tension is looser than others because of the way they're moving their stitches.
Because it's not because their tension is loose, it's because they lift as they make the stitch. So it makes those, if you look at a piece of crochet and you've got 2 little loops at the bottom of every stitch, it affects the length of that.
Right. Okay.
Can I show you this sample as well? I've got a sample of double crochet there.
Yeah.
And you can see how lovely and tight that is. That's kind of my standard tension, which would be about 21 stitches, 23 rows maybe. That's been blocked, and that makes a big difference too to tension. So that's my tension square done on a 4 millimeter for double. This is my treble, UK treble, and that's been done on a size smaller hook, but I'm still 1 stitch out on the tension on the width compared to double.
So if you're designing, then you're having to think about the composition of stitches to
I mean, I think it's because you see trebles give you a gap too.
But what can you do about altering your tension?
I think the first thing to try, if you find out you're loose or tight, is change your hook size up or down. So if you're loose, you'd go on a smaller hook. If you're tight, you'd go on a bigger hook.
Right.
That still doesn't address what Helen was saying about the riding, whether you go down or up, whether you hold your hook in a different way. There's great videos on YouTube that you can find about working your trebles. In particular, it's to do, like Helen said, it's to do with that first wrap of yarn around the hook.
And does it make any difference whether you're a pencil or a knife holder?
I don't think so. No.
Some people believe that a knife holder is more likely to lift and a pencil holder is more likely to yank. But I personally think No.
So with that, the difference between the double and the treble, Jane, you went down a hook size on for the trebles.
Yeah, I have to. I think that it's, when I do, if anybody's followed any of my patterns, like on Fruit Garden, you'll find that in a few places you are asked to change hook size. And it's just to keep that treble in check. So say you were trying to make a flat, straight piece of fabric. If you stayed on the same hook and started in double crochet and went to treble, it would get wider, regardless of your tension. I've never met anybody that it didn't get wider. Because
so that's the actual structure having an impact.
Yeah, absolutely, because the trebles create a bigger post and a gap between each post.
Gosh, it's just there's so much that can go wrong with tension. Give me some optimistic ideas about, you know, should we worry too much if we're a little bit out, or
no?
What can we do? What can we do to rescue?
It's not the end of the world.
You can always buy more yarn.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you know that your tension or your gauge comes up slightly looser or bigger than the designer does, then buy an extra ball of yarn of each colour that you're going to use.
And I think that thing with changing hook size, that will only work a couple of times. Like if you're supposed to be on a 4 and you go down to 3.5, that's fine. It will still all work nicely. If you go on but if you still don't achieve the right tension on that 3.5, go down to a 3, and obviously the hook is getting much smaller. So you might start to split the yarn. So even if you change your hook and try changing the way you physically do it, the thing with changing the way you do it is you will remember to do it for an hour, if you're lucky. If you're sitting in front of the telly for 3 hours crocheting away, you won't have remembered for the second 2 hours.
No.
So if you find that you get down to a 3mm and you're splitting your yarn but still not getting the tension right, there's no point trying to go down again.
No.
You just got to live with it.
Yeah.
And like
I mean,
said,
this is the thing as well. When you actually look at most yarn and the hook size that it calls for, when you actually put them together, it's not far off the same size.
Right.
The tip of the hook and the width of the yarn are not far off the same size. But I mean, I know people that will use, for instance, Special DK. They'll use a 5 or 6mm hook.
Wow.
And what happens then is it's not, you just don't get the nice definition to the stitches. You don't get the nice look to the fabric.
It gets sloppy.
And as Jane said, where you're making the taller stitches and you get that little space in between each post, that will get bigger and bigger and bigger.
So it spreads.
So the better thing to me is to teach yourself, because we can all train ourselves to work better, to work better.
Actually, that's the thing I've found as I've gone on with my craft, and for me it's mainly knitting, but I do some crochets. Actually, I'm constantly finessing my technique. I'm constantly suddenly looking at something and thinking, oh, that I can do it better that way, and learning something new. So yes, with crochet, it's just about slowing down for a little while and actually analysing what you're doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to me, it's about the enjoyment of it. So I know a lot of people love to crochet or knit while the TV's on. But sometimes actually you need to zone out of the background, whatever's going on, and actually just really be mindful of what you're doing. And that's when crochet becomes a real therapy. Because it teaches mindfulness.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to do that with the acanthus, Jane. That looks pretty tricky to me. I'm going to have to shut myself in a very quiet room.
You must do it in its stages. Honestly, just do it in its bits, and you'll be fine.
Well, that's the nice thing about crochet as well, is you are working in stages, and each stage is a little mini achievement. It's not like knitting a jumper and you have to sew it all up and get to the end. Actually, with a crochet along, a crochet blanket, there's a little win every time you finish a round or a motif, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what I like so much.
Yeah.
Ladies, thank you very much. I can't
Pleasure.
promise that we'll all be doing our tension squares or checking our tension, but we'll just buy more yarn instead.
Yes.
Thank you very much and see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.